that's big time. When you're writing these books, do you think about those awards, or you just?
Wow. You ain't tell me you were gonna ask me
Well,
that.
I just.
I assume it's like anything else, I have to do a lot of drafts for the writing I do. I have to draft a ton to find anything that's worthwhile. And so after like the second to last draft of this book particularly, there's a part of me that's like, people talking in your ear and you're like, man, you're gonna win everything. But
Yeah.
so I had a feeling it might do okay. I didn't expect to win that one.
Yeah.
That book isn't. I mean that award is incredible because it's not just like for autobiography or memoir. It's for like all nonfiction. So I was just up against some books that I would consider actually much better than my book, written by friends of mine. So I didn't expect to win it, no. And when I did win it, I kind of wanted to hide. 'Cause I don't know about you, but I don't do well with like praise and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. That's
But thank y'all so much for coming out. I just want to say, I never have been to Utah. I was writing as soon as I got back to the hotel. I was like, damn, I never even flew over Utah to go anywhere. But the kindness that I felt just even in the airport reminded me of home, and home is very different than this room, for example. Like I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. But the energy felt great, so I'm just very happy and just so thankful that you would make time for a book like this.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it.
Did y'all enjoy the book?
Wow.
But as get to know you a little bit. I know in the book you talked about basketball. Do you still play?
I laugh. You asked me that I was backstage. I started laughing. I got a friend, Damon Young, who is he's from Pittsburgh and he's about to come out with his book. And these people just gave Damon a ton of money to do these podcasts where he goes around the country playing basketball with people he looks up to. And he was like, yo, I'm gonna come down to Mississippi and we gonna ball. And I was like, bruh, I got half a hip. Like, I became really quickly that old dude who could outshoot you from 6 feet. You know what I'm saying? Like 6 feet only. But I tore up both my hips probably about 7 years ago. I write a little bit about it in the book, and I go out there and shoot, but I haven't played in a while.
Right.
But I watch it, and I still write for ESPN, and I'm in it a little bit too much for somebody who can barely move.
Right. Yeah. Understandable. So what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, I write. I write. I watch too much basketball. I read a lot. I mean, I'm a professor, so I have to read for my job, but also read a lot outside of that. I take care of my grandmother now. She's dying, and it helps me to be able to say that out loud so I can accept it. Her body is about to die, but her spirit is very much. So I've been taking care of my grandmother, listening to her stories. That's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 months, in addition to touring and teaching. My grandmother's an amazing storyteller, and she has dementia. So what's ill about dementia is that the actuality of the stories, become very fictional, but her ability to tell those fictional stories is amazing. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother, she was the best storyteller in my life, and then she got dementia, and she became like the really best storyteller. I mean, she went from like a realist storyteller to like an absolutely surreal storyteller, and it felt like it happened over a weekend. Anyway, for me, being able to laugh and talk about it is how I can get through, because she made it possible for me to even be somewhere like this.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So what was the writing process like? In my research, I seen you did so many revisions.
Yeah, man.
In a book like this, especially with your publishers being all white, what was their take on it?
So I wrote these other 2 books. I wrote a book called Long Division, and I wrote a book called How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in 2013. And I won't give you too much of the backstory, but those books were initially signed to Penguin Putnam, and I was a young writer, and they bought the books, and then my editor after they bought the books, were like, Kiese, we need you to move the narration of this book from Central Mississippi to upstate New York. And I was like, young writer, I'm like, okay, I'll try to do that. And then they were like, and actually we need you to change the narrators from two weird black boys to two white girls. And again, I'm a very young writer, so I'm like, okay, that's strange, but I'll try to do that too. And I tried, and then the last thing they told me was they needed me to take out what they call the racial politics out of the books. And if you took the racial politics out of both of those books, you just read in blank pages. So I was just like, I can't do that. So I went with independent press out of Chicago, where my friend Jasmine Ward published her first book. And because those books did well, Bloomsbury and Scribner wanted to sign me up for my next two projects. But initially what I sold to them was a weight loss book. It was supposed to be called 309, a fat black memoir. And I was going to lose 150 pounds so I could get back down to, sort of like what I considered then a comfortable weight, while talking to my mother and my grandmother about their relationships with sexual violence, food, and weight. And I started to do that book. I wrote that book. But again, partially because my grandmother's dementia and partially because I come from a family of like absolutely incredible, phenomenal liars, the stories just weren't true. So then I just started to say, I need to write this book to them instead of, having them tell readers stories that really sort of aren't true. So I started trying to write a book, and one chapter was going to be written to my grandmother, one was going to be written to my mom, one was going to be written to my ex-partner, and one was going to be written to my fictional daughter. And the hardest chapter in there was the chapter written to my mother. My mother had me, she was 19 years old. She taught me how to read and write. We went back and forth between arch enemy and like absolutely like being in love with one another. And there were just lots of secrets that we saw that we didn't talk about. And I just was like, you might only have one chance to do this book right. You got to write it to your mama. And I did it. And it took me a long time to do it because I had to write 3 different books before I could get to it, before I had the courage to do it. And I was really afraid, man, with this book because there's a lot of the tragedy and terror in this book is in the subtext. I mean, there's a lot in the actual text. There's a lot beneath the surface that I don't make plain. But I was just worried. I was worried about my mother, worried about my mother keeping her job, worried about me, worried about my keeping my job. But I was just like, you're a writer, you got to do it. And the publisher, Scribner, has been super supportive for lots of reasons. But one of the reasons they've been super supportive is because the book has done so well. But it never gets easier to actually talk about what's in the book. You know what I mean? It was a hard book to write. And so I'm just talking with you all sort of makes me happy. But when I see it here, I get excited, not because I wrote it, but because I don't have to write it anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just so glad the writing of that shit is done. Like, so glad. It was just a tough book. And I wasn't ready to write it, but I did.
Right. Well, let me take a question from the audience. You going through your book. You ready to ask one? Oh, you got it written down. All right.
I got it. So you got the highlighted version.
Yeah, I read the whole thing.
I got to get ready.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for writing this book.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to hear you say that you're glad to be done with it because, honestly, I'm glad to be done reading it.
Cool.
In a good way.
Okay.
It's heavy. The name is really appropriate. And
Right.
it wasn't like sit back on the beach and read this book, is
Right.
what I'm saying.
Right.
But I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So the question I had is a lot of what I see throughout the narrative is you trying to find control.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether that be through exercise, whether it be through eating, whether it be through gambling, throughout the narrative you keep finding something to fall back on, to maybe fill a hole or to make you feel like your feet are on the ground. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the book, I see you reconnecting with your mom, you're connecting with your grandma. And the question I have is like, now that the book's done, where are you finding your abundance now? What's doing for you what those unhealthy habits were doing? Where are you at now today?
Y'all prepared for this. y'all really prepared for this. I've been talking about this book now nonstop for the past 4 or 5 months, and I haven't gotten that question. I think I find abundance in a number of places because I'm still writing different stuff. I'm working in television now, working in film, and I'm still writing a new novel. But the place I find the most abundance, actually, fam, is like my grandmother is my heart and soul, and she is my, that the reason that I'm able to walk or to talk or to reckon. And she has diabetes. Diabetes often eats a lot of people up from the ground up, so she's losing parts of her legs and her feet, and often I have to take care of my grandmother in intimate ways that I never imagined taking care of my grandmother, in ways that my grandmother had to take care of me when I was a child. Meaning, like, my grandmother, when I was a child, she had to wipe my ass, I remember when I got chicken pox, and I remember I was like 7. I remember this vividly. I looked in the mirror, and I was just like, Grandmama, what happened to me? And this might not mean much to folks in this room, but, like, she just come home from work, from the chicken plant, and I felt like, because I had all these open chickenpox sores, and she held me. And when you're feeling like gross and sores and shit are oozing, the last thing you think is that somebody wants to touch you. My grandmother did that literally, and she did that figuratively so many ways. So I find abundance right now in doing everything I can to help, honestly, like, keep my grandmother alive, monetarily, but also just physically, and also just being there to hear her memories slowly leave her. And, at the end of this book, I talk about how she couldn't distinguish me from my Uncle Jimmy. And that hurt a lot for a lot of reasons. One, because my Uncle Jimmy was the only man in our family, and he died of an overdose. And she used to always try to warn me, like, whenever I did anything bad, she'd be like, boy, you acting like Jimmy. So anyway, I find my abundance in my grandmother, listening to her. I'm not trying to be sentimental when I say that. That's just the truth. I'm also a teacher, a professor, and I'm one of those teachers and professors who loves to teach. So I just really love seeing my students discover an idea, like to start with A, and then, by the end of the class, end of the semester, they've moved to like C. I'm corny, but that just makes me really happy. And watching a lot of basketball makes me happy. We were back there talking about LeBron, and if you're a LeBron fan right now, like, the soap opera is as tense as it has ever been. You know what I'm saying? I was in a bad mood today. I was talking to one of my friends, and she was like, what is wrong with you? And she was like, oh, I know, the game. The game. I was like, man, so. I find my abundance where I can, but I primarily find it with my grandmother, for sure. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Except for the LeBron part.
Except for the LeBron
Soap opera continues.
I mean,
it is what it is.
It's the best soap opera going, man, by far.
As the world turns.
Yeah.
My question for you would be, well, not really a question, it's something for you to kind of speak to, because my favorite section of the book was Black Abundance.
Yes.
And in that section, Hulk was a chapter.
Right.
And the whole Rodney King beating and the descriptions. And like we talked back there, those same descriptions, you see that in, police shootings or violence just in communities, like with Mike Brown.
Right.
Darren Wilson said, he had Hulk Hogan strength.
Yeah.
And when he looked in his eyes, he saw a demon.
Yeah.
So like, how important was it to like put that in the book, to share that? Like that was really honest. And you don't really see that in today's.
Yeah, man. I think it's
writing.
crucial for a lot of us black boys who grew up. I think we grew up with authority figures, be they teachers or police officers, treating us like grown men. And, even more than grown men. I think that what those transcripts from the Rodney King beating and the Trayvon Martin murder tell us is that often they see us as Hulks. And I'm trying to do something interesting in that chapter, but what I really was thinking about was, by the time I'm 12, 13 years old, I'd had cops pull guns on me, pull guns to my head. I'd had cops told me they saw me throw crack out of windows. I didn't They never saw me throw crack out a window because I didn't do crack. I didn't sell crack. I always tried to sell people. Whenever I would talk about that, I was like, I was a vegetarian. I don't know why, because I'm sure there are some vegetarians out there who handle crack. That was not me, though. And it's important for me also when I'm telling these stories, because when I wrote that book, fam, like, we didn't know each other, but I wrote that book to you. And when I'm telling you that story, on one level, I need to talk about the tragedy and the trauma of it all. But when we're telling stories to one another, often that tragedy and trauma is also marked by, like, comedy. You know, in some way, I think we laugh, obviously, to stop from crying and to laugh ourselves to make it so we can go outside. But, you know, for me, I was just a young, big black boy who got treated like a Hulk, who actually saw a man they said was a Hulk get destroyed on television. And I just was confused about how they could call Rodney King a Hulk when, I don't know how old most of y'all are, but y'all remember Lou Ferrigno. Like, Lou Ferrigno didn't fall down. Lou Ferrigno wasn't a clumsy runner. Lou Ferrigno could not have been chained up and watched by, like, you know, 5 or 6 white cops watching 4 or 5 other white cops beat somebody up. So I just wanted to talk about the nuances and the paradox of what it means to grow up as an actual child, whether people treat you like a child or not, and be treated like a Hulk. And I think if people see you as a Hulk, they can do anything to you, not just physically, but emotionally. You know, I have lots of friends who were treated like Hulks, who were incarcerated. And I say that as someone who taught at Vassar, a really elite liberal arts college on the East Coast. And, you know, and I had friends I had students who were wealthy, who started meth labs in their dorms, who, you know, were running like massive drug rings out of, like, you know, upstate New York. And they got caught and nothing happened to them. You know what I'm saying? Like, they weren't treated like Hulks. They were treated like young children who make mistakes. So in that chapter, I'm trying to say to us, and I'm trying to say to the world, we need to reconsider what we see when we see a lot of young black people, generally, and young black boys specifically. You know, I've never met a young black boy who's a Hulk. I met a young black boy who, like most children in this world, are conflicted. Sometimes they're wonderful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they treat people with respect, sometimes they don't. And I just don't think that a lot of times we grant certain people in this culture the ability to be children.
Yes,
so that's
sir.
what I wanted to do with that
Right.
chapter.
Yeah,
for
thank
sure.
you for that chapter,
Yeah.
for sure. Another question from the audience? Yes, sir.
So this isn't like book related, but kind of going off that, what's your opinion on then the Green Book winning Best Picture?
Ooh, I like that one. That was a good one.
Bruh. I will say, I want to answer that, but I want to say one thing. So the wonderful thing about being an American and being an American who is like hit with these award shows every few months, and I noticed this with the Grammys, like when Kendrick didn't win, or this year when Cole wasn't nominated for a Grammy, I did what most of us do, which is like, man, that's fucked up, you know? And then I had a friend who was like, it might be fucked up, but did you listen to the other song? You know, did you listen to the other albums? So I didn't see all of Green Book. I walked into Green Book, saw what it was about, and I snuck into another movie, you know? So I'm trying to say this without dissing Green Book, because I believe we shouldn't talk definitively about art we haven't completely consumed. I walked out of Green Book because I felt like I'd seen that movie before. That doesn't mean that movie can't be done well, but I think this notion of, like, you know, quote unquote, white people enabling kind of like black mobility and ultimately like white savior movies, I mean, that's a formula, it works. What I think is more interesting is that Green Book beat Black Panther and Black Klansman, which are two really completely different black films, and that don't really rely on white saviors. You know what I'm saying? But this is the Academy. I mean, they gave Driving Miss Daisy Best Picture over, I think it was Malcolm X, or was it Do the Right Thing? Do the Right Thing?
Yeah, it was Spike Lee.
I mean, I did see both of those movies, and Morgan Freeman is like home. I'm from Mississippi, but I I think you got to work really hard to make that film better than Do the Right Thing. And Malcolm X, I mean, I still don't think we understand what a great achievement that was in filmmaking, but especially in performance by Denzel Washington, you know, who played Malcolm Little, you know, Malcolm Red, and ultimately Malcolm X. So I'm not gonna try to diss on Green Book completely because I haven't seen it, but I will just say what I did see made me not want to stay in the theater. But if you know the Academy and you didn't think Green Book was gonna win, something wrong with you. Like, that's what they do.
Correct. Also, a tidbit on my next Ekpesbookclub on the autobiography of Malcolm X is March 5th. Hope y'all are still in there doing well and all that good stuff. Thank you.
That's an amazing, tough book, man.
Very tough book.
Yeah,
man.
that was the first book I read. Second book I read where I wanted to reread it, right? I was a kid, but I like wanted to reread because there's so much in there. So I hope y'all really dig into that if you haven't already.
Okay. Another question from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so your book has a lot of, it's heavy, obviously, and I feel like you're pretty real with like the things that you've experienced in life. If you had to summarize your book into like one message you would just wanted to share with everyone, what would that message be?
What happened to the easy question? What happened to the, could you tell us what you're reading now? Nah, I appreciate y'all really like pushing and asking questions you actually want to know the answers to. I think if I had to distill it down to one or two sentences, I would say that the world, possibly and definitely this country, is filled with people who have harmed lots of people and who've been harmed by lots of people, and we have no chance, absolutely no chance at liberation, at freedom, at equality, if we don't all find ways to honestly talk about the things that we feel like we have only experienced ourselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? At my worst, when I was dealing with things that, when I was trying to starve myself to death, when I was trying to eat myself to death, I didn't talk to people about it because I didn't think anybody else was going through it. You put a book out like this and everybody in the world comes in there like, yo, I had this happen to me and such happened with my mom. And so I just really think we need to do the courageous thing and also the thing that a lot of us haven't had modeled for us, which is to look backwards. And it's tough, and I think it's really tough, particularly for like cisgender men, because I think when I was growing up as a boy, one of the things I always heard grown men say was like, do you regret anything? And then men would be like, man, I don't regret shit, If that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be the person I am today. But that often comes from people who are really shitty people today, So I think that rhetorical gesture is something. I mean, we see that. I'm not trying to get too political, but I think Donald Trump is the walking embodiment of that. Like, I'm not gonna regret anything. It might actually help you to sometimes regret some things that you've done, and also be honest about things that you've had done to you. And so in this book, what I was trying to do was just say, like, I don't wanna just keep walking through earth passing as someone who is necessarily okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have been harmed. I have harmed people. I'm gonna try to use my art to talk about the shape of the harms that I've experienced and that I've put on other people, with the hope and the belief that other people will then talk amongst themselves and possibly with me about where we've been. But unless we honestly assess where we've been, I just think this notion of progress is completely fictitious. It's not possible. It's just you can't get there. You can't actually be a better person if you don't assess where you've been. And so that's why the last chapter is called Ben. That's why the other chapter is called Ben, B-E-N-D. I just think we can be better if we actually assess and look back and trust that even though the shape of the pain that a lot of us have experienced is different, the constitution of that pain is the same. You know what I'm saying? The constitution of that pain is the same. And I don't think we really get encouraged to do that kind of work. So that actually was way more than one sentence, so my bad for that.
It's quick, so I don't know if I need the microphone. I'm curious to know how the book, if you're still in touch with your friends that you described in high school and middle school, how has that honesty that you shared affected your friendships? with them?
Especially Lathan.
Lathan,
Yeah.
I'm
And
glad
how
you-
is Lathan?
Lathan loves you, fam. Like, Lathan was the first person who hit me up, and he was like, you know, they like fucking with you, and I was like, stop. And he was like, so my friend Lathan Carlisle, and I can say his name because he allows me to say his name. A lot of the other people have made up names in the book. You know, Lathan was like me. We loved wrestling. We loved basketball coming up. We went to the same schools all through high school. I transferred and went to the school called DeMatha to play basketball in 10th grade, and Lathan stayed home. Long story short, Lathan got in trouble for selling weed the summer after he graduated, and he had gotten a scholarship to Alabama to do an engineering program. So he got in trouble for a little bit, but then he got back right. He's an engineer right now. He has 2 amazing kids. His wife has, you know, really bad cancer, and he really loved his part in the book. So I come from a lot of friends who, like, when my friends found out I was writing this book, it didn't matter how close they were to me. They were all like, can you put me in there? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how many authors are in this room, but, I mean, yeah, we could maybe talk about that later, but so I had to talk to everybody that I write about in this book. I had to talk about what they remember, because like as writers, you can't just trust your memory. You have to do some sort of like reporting. You have to ask people. And so there's a chapter in the Black Abundance section where initially when I wrote that chapter, Lathan, we get kicked out of school the first day of school because Lathan was cutting up a grapefruit, and the teacher thought that 2 black boys with a knife was bad. And we'd never been to school with white kids before. And so my memory was Lathan was cutting up an apple. And in my memory, it was a really dull plastic knife, right? That was my memory. So then when I talked to Lathan, I was like, man, you remember that time Miss so-and-so kicked us out of school? Huh? Yeah, man, people love to sue, bro. I can't. Yeah, people love to sue. But, and then he was like, yeah, fam, I remember that, but he was like, that wasn't an apple. And I was like, what was it? He was like, that was a grapefruit. And he was like, I was like, what, a grapefruit? He was like, you don't remember how sticky our hands were when we were walking to the principal's office? And I was like, no, but that's a great detail. Like, you know what I'm saying? And then I was like, but the knife was a plastic butter knife, right? And he was like, bruh, that was a real knife, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, oh shit, that kind of messes the story up. But I was like, but it was a real butter knife, right? And he was like, yeah, it was a butter knife, So I had to talk to a lot of my friends to write the book with any sort of integrity. And, you know, all of them those are people who made the book. Even if I don't really render them with like sort of complexity or like a generosity that they might want, they're happy that their likenesses are in the book. I mean, and I'll tell you, like, you know, maybe I shouldn't say this in this room, but, you know, one of the older women who sexually abused me when I was a kid, I had to talk to her about this because I wanted to talk to her about what she remembered about the situation and about the abuse that she was experiencing at the hands of her partner. And we talked about it. But at the end, she really was like, and when you write me, can you make sure that you tell them that I had on felines? I don't know if y'all know what felines are, but like felines for us were like a big deal shoe. And I just thought like, I'm like, okay, like, you know, I'm talking about things you know, and you know, she was somebody who was being, literally she was being abused by her boyfriend, and she was doing things to me at 9 that were I didn't know at the time, but that were abusive. I thought she was my girlfriend, but she was doing things to my body she shouldn't have been doing. And that conversation was hard, but the last thing she literally said was like, can you remind them that I had on Fila? So I just think it's really interesting that people, I don't know, fam, I don't know, that's what happened. I just think it's really interesting that people sometimes, even if you're rendering them in ways that they might not want to be rendered, the small details that they want to see as part of who they are in every situation with everybody in this book have just been like amazing to me. My mom even, my mom, I interview her a million times for this book, and one of the things that she's like, she was like, well, just remind them that I used to sharpen your pencils at night with a knife. And I was like, okay, like, why? And then she was like, well, Key, because like, it was really hard sometimes to get those pencils so they didn't look like claws. I don't know if y'all had I don't know how many of y'all had the mamas who would sharpen the pencil with the knives. Maybe not, younger. Maybe letting you into too much. But anyway, so sometimes people that you interview for these books, sometimes they want details put in the books that don't really won't do anything for the book, but will do something for them. And sometimes you have to find ways to give them a little bit of what they want.
That's interesting.
That's real.
That's cool though. I mean, that's
cool,
cool.
though.
Yeah, that's cool. So my question is about the question I have deals with the abuse that you received and you've seen,
Yeah.
and how that affects your relationships now. And if you were to have your own family, would that abuse? Who would that abuse? I don't know.
Wow.
You know what I'm trying to say?
I do. I don't have kids, and I don't have kids for a number of reasons, but the primary reason I don't have kids is that I was afraid, I am afraid of like indirectly harming them, and I'm afraid that I can't protect them from the world. But I think it's deeper than that because I think every person I've met has that same fear. So it has to go a little bit deeper. And if I can just be maybe just blunt, it's like I know my mama believes that she loved me as like fully as she could. And in that love, there was lots of abuse. There was emotional abuse, economic abuse, physical abuse. And I'm thankful for my mother. My mother is the other reason that I'm here. She taught me how to read. She taught me how to write. She taught me how to revise. But I also remember her like looking at her face when she would be beating me sometimes. And when somebody is trying to hit you as hard as they can. And what my mother wanted me to understand was that like while she was beating me, she was really trying to save me from being treated like a Hulk, right? That's what she wanted me to understand. The whipping, the beatings, the blah, 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 blah that I'm giving you are all to protect you from these people out there. But I understood really early that no beating could protect me from cops treating me like a Hulk. Do you know what I'm saying? I got kicked out of college for taking a library book out of a library without checking it out in a state where people tell you that the way black boys ascend is to read. Okay, well, I'm trying to check out Red Badge of Courage from my library in college. I left my card in my room. I dropped the book underneath the scanner. I looked up at the camera. I slid the book under the scanner. I took the book out. The next day, I brought the book back, and I got kicked out of school. So I'm saying all that to say my mother's belief was that respectability and educational attainment are what can save us. But even early on, I was just like, educational attainment can help us broaden our imaginations. It can help me connect to you, but it's not going to save us from white supremacy. Dr. King was as eloquent and as well-dressed and as well-read as we will ever meet another human being on this earth, and he got shot, and he looked really good. He was dressed really well when he got murdered. Malcolm X was dressed immaculately well when he got murdered. So I'm not trying to say that to say, of course, that education isn't important, but my mama's belief that you could beat respectability and beat educational attainment into a young black child, with all due respect, was just wrong. It just was wrong. And this book allowed me to talk to her about how she might discipline me differently if we could go back. So in my own personal relationships, what I try to do is I try to talk and listen. I think active listening is much more important than active talking sometimes. But I found myself in relationships in college where, you know, there'd be women who might be interested in me, and those women, almost every woman I was in a relationship with would talk to me about being sexually abused. Almost every woman I was in a relationship with would talk about being emotionally abused. I would listen to these people talk, and there was no part of me that had enough courage to be like, oh, well, let me tell you something else that happened to me, and let's talk about it. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm saying all that to say, I didn't have the courage until I wrote this book to be the kind of friend, partner, or parent that I need to be. I think this book has helped me become a better potential parent, a better potential partner, a better teacher, a better friend. But I didn't want to hurt anybody until I had done that work. And this work is never done, but I'm doing it. I'm doing it now. And I think I'm ready to be a loving, caring partner, a loving, caring parent for the first time in my life. So that got real deep real quick. So.
Yeah, no, I was going to change up the question. Man. Oh.
I feel that.
So what's your favorite TV show? When you get around to watch TV.
I like Atlanta. All right, I watch a lot of Atlanta. I watch Sopranos over and over and over again. I like reality TV.
Okay.
I like Real Housewives.
Daily rap.
I just watch way too much basketball for somebody who has a real job. So, yeah. Someone over here had a question. Okay.
Oh, yes, ma'am. A couple more questions.
So you've talked about how you've been on tour, and obviously you've heard a lot of reactions to the book. Based on the reactions you've heard, is there anything that you wish you had left out, or anything that you wish you had put in?
Okay, y'all are for real the best, the worst and the best. The worst because you can't coast. I can't. You know, like sometimes when you write these kind of books, you got like 15 answers in your head, and you're like, how do I answer that question with one of those 15 answers? Nobody's ever asked me that before. Okay, so the interesting thing about this book to me is like the two, I think, most traumatic sort of experiences that were supposed to be at like the center of the book did not make the book, right? One of them had a lot to do with an extreme kind of sexual violence, and one of them had to do with an extremely emotionally abusive relationship that I was in. That I was extremely emotionally abusive to one of my partners in college, right after college. And the first one I had to take out just for legal reasons and, you know, statutes of limitations and whatnot, and we didn't want people to go to jail or anything like that. But the second one was that I was writing, I thought to write a book like this, you needed to quote unquote come clean. And so the chapter in the book called Terrors was actually a chapter where I talk about, again, just being a tyrant to this woman who adored me. Not a physical tyrant, but an emotional tyrant. Like this woman would say that, you know, she thought the sky was blue today, and I'd be like, you know, try to convince her that it wasn't. I'm just saying that as an example. But in talking to her, one of the things she told me was like, you know, Kiese, she said, you treated me like shit. I had to go to, I'm still in therapy for like all of the lies and all of the deception and all of the manipulation. And she said, if you think I'm gonna let you lie to me in private, but then publicly get Scribner money to tell the truth that I've been begging you for, she's like, you're wrong. She's like, you gotta keep my name out of that book, because the shit that you're telling the world, I wanted you to tell me privately. So I had to take that out of the book because ethically it was wrong. You know, I didn't take it out of the book because I was afraid of what people would say about me. I took it out of the book because this woman who I purported to love told me that it was wrong. And it was wrong to not tell her the truth, but then get like, you know, lots of money from Scribner and then tell Scribner and you the truth. You know what I'm saying? So, I took that out of the book. Some of the sections that I wish I would have left in the book are when I moved back to Mississippi, I connected with the man who beat my mom up, and I thought that encounter was going to be a lot more physical, a lot more violent. But when I met him, you know, he just had a massive stroke. He could barely talk. He was in a wheelchair. This was a guy who was like the richest lawyer in my city at the time. And so when I was preparing how I was going to interact with him, I was puffing my chest up, getting ready to, you know, not hurt him physically, but try to hurt him with my words. And then when I saw him and heard him, I was just like, fuck, yo, life is so much more complicated than you think, you know? Like, life had done to that man something I could never, ever do to him. So instead of, like, berating him and asking him a lot of questions about why he treated my mother the way he did, I just asked him how he felt. And he started crying about all the things he regretted. And one of the things he talked about regretting was how he treated my mother. And in this strange, really terrible way, I started for the first time to see myself in him, which I had never prepared for. But I took that out too. So that's something retrospectively, I wonder if I should have kept in. But if I kept that in, people in my town, well, people around my city would have known who he is because his accident was very public. So thank you for that question. Okay.
I'm curious about the process. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, you
I
in
thought you
here.
were someone else. I was like, okay, go with them. No, I'm curious about I listen to the book.
Okay.
I drive a lot, so I listen.
Yeah.
And you recorded that, so I'm curious about that process and what that was like for you to read the book, because I presume that you start reading after it's all finished.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, I mean, I'm a writer who believes in like orality, like the way words sound on a page matter to me. So, you know, I have a writing practice and I write in the morning, I write at night, and on the weekends I revise. But on the weekends when I'm revising, I'm reading it out loud to myself to see how I want it to sound. And so sometimes when you read it out loud, you realize there needs to be, you know, commas here, you realize a semicolon needs to go there. Sometimes you realize you can take a word out. So I've been reading that book to myself for 4 years and reading parts of it to my mom and my grandmama. But when I actually recorded the audiobook, it was interesting because, like, you know, I won this thing called an audiobook of the year for that book, which was weird for me because I recorded that book in a studio in country ass Oxford, Mississippi, like in this white brother's like attic, you know. And it's weird. The white brother was from Utah. And the story about recording that book is so ill, and I'm about to let y'all all into my business. So when I show up at the door, and so my publicists were like, yeah, you got to record, and I was like, can I record it in Memphis? They were like, oh, we can't find a studio. And I was like, can I record it in Jackson? They're like, we can't find a studio. And they were like, oh, but we found like a really nice homey studio for you. And immediately, and I'm like, homey studio. So I drive to this brother's house. He opens the door. He has on socks. I didn't have on any shoes, but I had massive amounts of foot powder in my shoes. So then I'm like, damn, do I take my shoes off in this brother's house? You know? And this is the brother who's gonna be controlling, he's audio engineer. So I'm like, I'm being I'm like, yo, will he fuck my shit up if I leave, you know what I'm saying? If I leave mad footprints in his joints. So he was like, you want to take your shoes off? I'm like, I'm good. So we climb up the attic and we start recording. But like the thing about it is like, he never recorded an audiobook before. He'd only recorded bands. But when I wrote this book, I didn't think about being like this close to a white man who lived in Mississippi from Utah. Like that wasn't my primary audience. And so when I'm reading, I can say that, you know, I'm trying to read to you because I imagine you reading this book. I didn't imagine this brother reading this book. But he's like you, right? But it's like for real. I'm not even being funny. It's like, what if we recorded an audio book, fam? This audio book with the words in it, and you, who I don't even meet, are like right here, you know? And I'm like saying the shit I'm saying in there. Some of the stuff I'm saying in there is very critical of white people, and I'm looking at a white brother. So there were a lot of levels to the recording of this audio book for me. And I did not think it was gonna work out. I thought, because of the content of the book, I was like, man, he gonna mess up my levels and all that kind of stuff. But it worked out somehow. And it was just so bootleg. Like anytime like a truck went by on the outside, and it's Mississippi, so there's always trucks going by on the outside, he'd be like, hold up, Kiese, we need to just pause for a second. And I'd be like, for what? He was like, don't you hear that? And I was like, no. And he's like, okay, just trust me. And so that's what happened with that audiobook. But like when we won audiobook of the year, I literally thought it was like an April Fool type thing. Like, it's like, what? For that? Because most of these audiobooks are read by actors, and often they're read by actors who have read hundreds of audiobooks. Do you know what I'm saying? So, but with the audiobook, what I wanted to do was give the listener the impression that I was reading this to my mama, actually, because my mama used to make me read stuff and write stuff, and then I'd have to sit there in front of her and read it to her out loud, and then she could tell me if it was good or bad or terrible or somewhere in between. So I wanted people to feel like they were watching me read the book to my mom. And I don't know if that's the experience people felt or not, but that's what I intended.
So my question, well, first of all, what's your favorite color? I'll give you an easy one.
Orange?
There you go. Good. The stuff that you've gone through and the success, and sitting here tonight listening to you, the success, I mean, it shows, words don't describe the strength of character, I feel, that you've been able to accomplish. Do you think, looking back now from kind of the introspective lens of as a successful person, having been through that trauma and those experiences are in many ways a refiner's fire and have actually given you some of that strength that you've built upon today in some of your writing and some of your professional career? And my second part of my question is, what is, I mean, it's a loaded question, but what would be the advice that you have? Because like you said, so many people are struggling with their demons,
Right.
that pulled you out of, some of those traps to bring you to where you are today, that people could, incorporate in their own life.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I mean, I'm just going to answer that honestly. Like, I honestly feel that had some of those things that happened in my life not happened, I actually think I would have been here earlier. So I think it's really important for people to understand, because I do think we are enamored with pain and enamored with making pain, normalizing pain, and making magic out of the pain. But sometimes, for the sake of the children coming tomorrow, I think we need to ask ourselves, what happens if we limit the amount of pain and violence the particular children experience? So I always have to say that, because I don't want people to feel like I'm just here because of all the painful shit that happened to me. Partially that's true. And thankfully, my mother and my grandmother gave me like an art form to help me navigate that, right? But for the most part, I feel like I'm lucky to be here given some of the things that happened to me. You know what I mean? Like, but the second part is the more important part. Like, I am under no illusion that what happened to me is heavier or deeper or more violent or more substantial than anything that happened to anybody in this room. I just think it's a different shape. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I spent most of my life, 15 years, teaching kids, and often those kids were really wealthy kids. And the stories that those kids would tell me about their childhoods, about their parents' addiction, were experiences that I just didn't have to face. And these were like really, quote unquote, elite 1% kids, These were Target heirs. These were the children of like famous movie stars that I can't even say. So I'm saying all that to say, I think we just have to be careful about being like, yo, you turned all that pain into something. Like, maybe, but my question is, like, what could I have done had I not endured some of those things? You know what I'm saying? If police hadn't perpetually, the crazy thing about police, and I don't know if you experience this, it's like, when police stop me and they ask me if the car is mine or if I've thrown crack out of the window, the absolutely crazy thing is I'm always like, shit, is this my car? And y'all laughing. But like, it's part of like what we do about normalizing police power, for example. Because part of me is like, surely they wouldn't just make that up. I remember like the third time they said I threw crack out the car. I was in Pennsylvania. I was really like, maybe I did throw some crack out the car. Do you know what I mean? Like that sounds insane to most people, except people who've experienced that. Because really what that is saying is like, I want to give these police officers who are human beings, who were children at one point, who are complicated, like much more often than I should, right? I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. So the second part of your question is that I'm learning a lot from children. Because like, you know, when I go to high schools in Mississippi, for example, when I was in high school, there was nobody who was out, who was like, you know, I identify as a queer young person. And when I go in these high schools now, I see a lot of young people who are embracing their identities and saying that, right, you know, I identify as queer, right? I don't know if they're doing that with the support of their teachers or the administrations, but they're doing that. And so a lot of what I've learned, particularly around sexuality, around like economic power, like the spectrums of both, have come from students and teachers. Do you know what I'm saying? So as a teacher, long-winded way of my saying that, like, I just think as a teacher and as a writer, sometimes people can come to you and they think you're an expert. But I think a lot of the shit that I'm writing about in this book, I think I'm better at dealing with. But when we leave this thing, there's a part of me that's still gonna wanna lie. There's a part of me that's still gonna wanna, you know, hurt people and then lie about how much I hurt people. So I'm saying all that to say, like, these books and, you know, these tours and these awards mean a lot, but they're not deliverances. What I'm trying to say is, like, the work of being a loving, caring, tender person is a lifetime of perpetual work for everybody, regardless of race, regardless of sexuality, regardless of age. And if you for a second think you're delivered, I guarantee you on the next day there's gonna be somebody who's gonna bear the brunt of you thinking that you've been delivered from being painful and harmful to somebody. So I know it's a perpetual life work. I wrote a book. I'm thankful my mother and I are in a better place, but we could be in a worse place 2 weeks from now if we don't work. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the work is much more important than the desire to feel like we are necessarily delivered. Because I'm not sure what deliverance actually looks like in a world that's always encouraging us to do what I would consider wrong.
Whew, that was,
Uh-oh.
oh yeah, because I was about to end it, because that was an answer for the ages, so go ahead.
I have just a question about, I also listened to the book, and I think it's very poignant when you hear your voice reading it, because you can feel the emotion, the pain, the anguish sometimes. But I wondered if, you talk a lot about your grandma, and she has such unconditional love for you, and I wondered if that is, did you feel like your grandma was the unconditional love and your mother was the conditional love, and where's your relationship at with your mom now?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is I definitely thought and think that my grandmother, I mean, man, you know, I'm born and raised in Mississippi because my grandmother, unlike everybody else in her family, did not run north, right? Most of the people, y'all know about the Great Migrations, and my grandmother, instead of running like her sisters and her brothers and her cousins and her mom and her father, you know, they didn't run from Mississippi to Indianapolis to Detroit to Chicago to Racine. You know, she literally believed at 8 years old, because she'd been working at 8 years old for like 4 years, hard in fields. She tells me now, she was like, I worked that land. Like, that land was as much mine as it was anybody else's. So why should I have to leave and go make a home in some like urban city that I don't really know when I was born here? Like, that takes an amazing amount of audacity for anybody, but particularly for a young person. So I'm born in Mississippi because of my grandmother. And like, my grandmother worked her entire life. She worked at chicken plants. She worked in numerous white people's homes. Often those white people did not actually know her real name. My grandmother's name is Catherine Coleman. Sometimes they would call her Reno. I remember I said this in the book. I'd be like, Grandma, why you let these people call you out your name? And she was like, you know, I'm wearing a disguise, Key. Like, I'm in control of that situation. I don't want them to know my name. I want them to know who they think I am so I can get what I want to get from them. She thought it was very transactional, you know. And then she worked in the chicken plant. What did she do in the chicken plant? Chicken plants have changed now, but chickens would come by the bus load. My grandmother would get a big tray of chickens. She'd throw them in a boiling water. She'd take them out of the boiling water, put them up on a hook. She'd cut them open, snatch the guts out. She did that for 20 years. You know how much my grandmother gets $400 a month in Social Security. That's how much money my grandmother, she worked her entire life. Partially because if you work your entire life and you work in people's homes and kitchens, you can't get Social Security for that, right? So part of what I do is, you know, pay for my grandmama to make sure my grandmama has the best of everything because she deserves the best of everything. She didn't deserve the best of everything just because of her work. She deserved the best of everything because she, for me, showed me a model of what, like, unquote unquote unconditional love could be. So yes, but the hardest part in me writing this book, and that's another thing I took out of the book, I just want to let you know, is that, you know, my grandmother, in talking to me, has her own, like, absolutely horrific experiences with physical violence, with sexual violence at the hands of people who were related to her, at the hands of her husband, at the hands of people at work. You know, that initially was a whole chapter. I condensed it into one paragraph because my grandmama told me she didn't want all of that out there. Do you see what I'm saying? But what I'm trying to say is, like, my grandmother did love me, quote unquote, unconditionally, but I didn't understand as a young person that she also needed to be loved unconditionally, and she didn't find that love anywhere. She didn't find that particular love that she gave to us anywhere. So she pieced the love together, right? And so now I'm trying to love my grandmother in that way, and it's really hard to love somebody in that way when their memory is gone. Like, sometimes she doesn't even remember who she is. You know, I'm sure a lot of y'all have experienced that. That gets a little complicated. So, but she's still my rock. When she passes, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know what any of us are gonna do with my family. My mother is a very complicated woman, and we are definitely in a better place. But to give you an idea of who my mother is, you know, this book has done fairly well. I've won a lot of awards, sold a lot of books, made my family, for us, a lot of money. And the first thing my mama said when she heard I was coming here was, Key, you better wear that tie I gave you. You know, she don't know that tie been gone. You know what I'm saying? I threw that ugly tie away as soon as she gave me that tie. So I was like, yes, Mama. And I didn't realize the camera was gonna be here and shit. So I'm like, I was like, I got you, Mama. But that's my mama, you know, and like, she's still, you know, I won this award that's gonna be announced next week, and I told my mom, and then, you know, instead of like doing what I wanted her to do, she was just like, don't get the big head. I'm like, Mama, that award comes with 30 G's. Like, I'm trying to help you out. You know what I'm saying? She was like, Key, whatever, don't get the big. But my point is, she's still my mama. Like, and now I know how to love my mama. I know how to love my mama. Like, sometimes I know how to push my mom away. I know when to hold her close. You know, after this book, I didn't talk to my mama, honestly, for a long time. And after this book came out, one of the things that happened, I was going through something in my life that I just needed help. And I was like, Mama, I just need you to be my mama right now. And can you just tell me what to do? And she just broke down crying because I hadn't asked her to be, quote unquote, my mama for like 3 decades. You know what I'm saying? When I left home at 17, I left. She never gave me anything. I didn't ask for anything. But, you know, after this book, I felt like it was okay for me to be like, I need help. Can you help me? I'll help you if you help me. So just like everybody else in the room, we're working through it. Some days are better than others, some days are not. But I know we've given ourselves a chance because we've both been honest with each other about things we did not want to be honest about. And that's one of the only ways to give relationships a chance. You have to be able to talk about that stuff you don't want to talk about. You have to be able to hear it, and you have to be able to tenderly and compassionately move through it. And so we're better at it. Tomorrow we might not be, the next day we might not be, but I know we're better than we were. So I'm just, oh, another guy raised his hand. Is that okay?
Are you fine with that?
I'm cool. Whatever.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
for whatever y'all want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to turn the spotlight away from you and onto us.
Okay. Ooh, they a bit on me. All right, cool.
No. So an easy question, real quick. What's the percentage split for your students? You teach, students of color versus white students, 50-50, 80-20?
Where I teach now?
Yeah.
So I teach at University of Mississippi right now, the place where the brothers knelt this weekend.
Yeah, I saw
because the neo-Confederate folks came onto campus. So my graduate classes are majority folks of color, maybe 30% black, 20% Asian, and maybe like 30-40% white. My undergrads are majority white. Maybe like 70-30 or something like that.
So taking that number, like, so here's my question. We've spent a lot of time listening to how complicated and how you navigated everything.
Right.
I don't have any idea how to navigate what I am supposed to know how to navigate. White privilege, white guilt, feeling like how much is too much? How much interest in Utah Black Lives Matter is authentic and real and will be seen that way versus being seen as a savior complex or anything else like that. What advice do you have for us, or how do you talk to your white students, for example, about this? How do we navigate this? How do we navigate guilt and reparations and slavery and a history and a life that and a world and Utah and like it doesn't make any sense to me, and I'd love to hear you talk to me and as a white guy about how to navigate that stuff.
Yeah, and I'll, before I even attempt to answer that, I'll say that I think that any answer I give should pale compared to the answer that you actually have, because you have lived most of your life as a white American, right? And I hear you asking me for advice, and I'm gonna give you some advice. But I mean, it's difficult, fam, because like a lot of times, what I noticed in white students and also white readers is sometimes I'm glad that you even said the word white, because a lot of times people don't even want to say the word white, and they don't even want to say the word black. I think sometimes white people think saying black makes you anti-black, or saying black makes you, or talking about indigenous people makes you necessarily like anti-indigenous folk. So one thing I would encourage people to do is actually think about what it means historically to be white. And honestly, I think this because I deal with words all the time, I think white privilege is a sort of do-nothing phrase. I think we use white privilege instead of white power because white privilege makes people seem and feel less defensive. But I think when you talk about white power, you can then talk about the ways everybody in this room invest in particular kinds of white power. I think you can talk about the ways that white power necessitates us talking about what it means to abuse white power. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it's privilege. If I remember when I was in grad school, we just finished playing basketball. I went to a restaurant to eat, and it was 3 black dudes and 1 white dude. And then the 4 of us saw a police car pull up to the Chinese restaurant we were eating at, and all of us, the 3 brothers, and the 3 brothers, I was in graduate school. One brother was an actual lawyer, and one brother was in law school, and the white brother, was selling vacuum cleaners. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing wrong with selling vacuum cleaners. That's just what he did. But when the cops pulled up, all of our bodies changed. All of our bodies were like, we physically were like, oh shit, are they coming from us? We were younger because of our history. This young vacuum cleaning brother, who also sold weed on the side, you wouldn't have known cop pulled up or nothing. This motherfucker what's wrong with you guys? I'm like, bro. And we just looked, and so to me, I don't know if it's a privilege that when cops come around, you're going to be assumed innocent. I think that's power. I think we have to talk about that as power. And I think if you start to talk about it as power, You have to start talking about what it means to divest yourself of that particular power. And that's a hard conversation. Because I think these, in books and stuff, it's not hard. But what does it mean to actually divest of a particular kind of power? Like, what does it mean to make your particular individual whiteness, like, less powerful? Does it mean just talking to us? Does it mean actually organizing? Does it mean investing in particular kinds of reparations? I'm not sure what it means, but I know we can't even get there yet because we're not even talking about the white power that white people in this country necessarily have. And if you talk about white power, then you also have to start talking about stratifications. You have to start talking about class. You got to start talking about, like, wealthy white people actually do have more power than poor working class white folks. And poor working class white folks, if you look at all the numbers in the country, actually do have more power than working class and poor black people and poor indigenous folks. You know what I'm saying? So I just think, because I'm a language person, I think a lot of this is about the language. And I just think we have to do more. People call, like, microaggressions, like when people disrespect, when I come to work and I go to work, I'm fairly successful where I work, and I'm going to come to work dressed however I want to dress. That's just me. I'm hard-headed, And people are like, oh, man, you looking like a thug today, That's not a fucking microaggression. That's power. Because I've been teaching in academia for like 30, 20 years. I've never seen a white brother and thought to approach him and say, you look like a thug today? Wow, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? But I'm just saying what we call that is like microaggressions. I don't think that. I think that's an abuse of power. I think often white people who have a particular kind of power that they're sure about and fine with feel okay coming into a black body being like, you look like a thug. Why is that abusive? Because we know what this culture, particularly like the carceral state and police, feel like they can do to people who quote unquote look like thugs. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's why, like, everywhere I go, I wear a hoodie. I wear everything in the world that people assume, quote unquote, thugs wear and look like. People assume thugs are gonna rape. We assume thugs are gonna kill. We assume thugs are gonna take everything from you. We assume thugs are gonna do. I'm not gonna do none of that shit to you. But I need you all to see that just because I got on a hoodie and some shoes, you know what I'm saying? That, like, I'm not trying to harm you. But to go back to you, I just think it means like having hard, rigorous conversations about white power with white people. And I'm answering that question generously because you all have been generous to me. But I also think sometimes the questions that we ask of black people about whiteness are questions that could be better explored with white people. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not trying to be like we need to be in our separate silos. But I've been to many a talk when white people are like, can you tell me why white people are the way they are? And I'm just like, can you tell me? Shit. My whole family want to know that. Not you, not you, but I'm saying one. Do you understand the question? You understand what I'm saying? Like, I just think sometimes, yeah, I mean, we could switch it if we talk about gender too, but that would be my answer. I mean, I hear you asking that question from the heart, but I also think changing the language that we use to talk about identity is crucial to actually like changing the social conditions that make that identity powerful or less powerful. So I appreciate that question.
One last one.
You don't got to do your eyebrows at me, but yeah.
Why'd you come to Utah? Well, I mean, I know why you came, but why agree to come?
Yo, y'all
That's a
are
good one.
really out here.
Well, I think the same thing. I think
That's a great. I just believe in trying to be honest. So, I mean, honest. Okay, so I watched Ekpe play ball. I was enamored with him. Earlier playing ball. I followed his career when he went to Turkey and all of that kind of stuff. When I found out that he read my book, I was geeked. I was like, I talked to my agent, I talked to my publicist, and I was like, did you see this? And I'm just gonna be honest with you. And I hope this is okay for me to be honest with you. And then one of my publicists was like, he wants you to come out. And I was like, yo, let's go. I'm hyped. But, when you do this kind of stuff, it's not just you, it's machines, right? So then they were like, oh, well, we're going to have to figure out how much it's going to cost to get you out there. And I'm like, what? Like, I'll pay my way out there to come talk, But I didn't pay my way. You know, this brother paid my way to come out here and you know, made some money for me and also made some money for the publicists who get, man, I'm talking all the true shit right now in these cameras. So, I mean, honest to goodness truth is like, I feel like people fetishize places. Utah is always a place that I fetishize, meaning like, I've always heard Utah is just like the most beautiful place in the country. I wanted to come to a beautiful place in the country, also a place I've never been. I really like the Utah Jazz, right?
There you go. That's good enough for me right there.
And I really loved this brother before I found out what he was doing. And like, you know, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but like, this is that kind of like life-changing work that does not have to be done, right? Like, you could be doing so much more tonight. Y'all could be doing so much more tonight. We're in here really trying to grapple with ideas based on art. That's just like wonderful and weird to me. And I'm a magnet to wonderful, weird shit. Like, that's what I like to do, you know? And if I can do it around people who I've looked up to, you know? And it's weird, I think, growing up is if you love basketball the way I love basketball, I always assume that these cats are older than me. Like, we were in the back, and then Donovan came in the room, and I'm sitting down, and I got to be almost twice as old as Donovan. And I'm just like, I didn't know where to put my eyes. You know what I'm saying? And then I'm like, wait a minute, this joker literally could be my son. You know, like I'm much older than you. You know what I'm saying? But so anyway, I'm here because I love ball. You know, I love Ekpe. I love fucking like the Utah Jazz, and I'm really grateful anytime any people put any of their like care into any art I produce, because there's so many things out there in the world you could be giving your time and effort to. And so to give your time and effort to a book like this, which is so personal, and I gotta admit, I never imagined people in Utah reading this book. I just feel like that's magic. And I just think when you feel magic, you gotta get close to magic. So that's why I'm here.
And with that said, you know, this has been special. This has definitely been special to have this conversation in this space with, I would say, the work that we do with our discussions on Twitter and, you know, in front of the world, and seeing that we're having these tough discussions, and then being able to have Mr. Laymon here, so, you know, just so we can connect. But since you're a big basketball fan, definitely have a gift for you. You know.
Whoa!
Yeah. Couple gifts for you.
Yo! Wow!
Yo, Utah.
Wow! Hold on,
Jazz,
man. Wait. I got the. Oh, I left my phone back there. Okay.
Oh, we'll get all the pictures.
Okay.
But, you know, we just definitely wanted to say thank you for coming this way and everything you're doing.
Yo!
Yes, sir.
Thank you, bro.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, bro. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all again for coming out. It's a wrap.
Yeah.
Would you like to sign up here?
Sure. Wherever you.
Oh, well, y'all can come up here and he'll sign y'all's books, and then hopefully take a picture at the end, and then go about our business. Change the world.
Wow. That's crazy. For real, right? I'm just kind of, I'm trying to.
So y'all just line up this way.
All right.